Bojack Horseman has an incredible cast of characters, and me saying that is basically redundant at this point, as I have spent the better part of 3 hours talking about the show on YouTube. Each of the core characters of the show have a truly impressive amount of depth put into their writing. I think every single person who has watched the show has been able to connect with one character or another. But one character that I have done approximately 0 videos on is Diane. Now, this isn't because I hate Diane like a ton of people apparently did during the middle of the show's run, but because, in all honesty, I was completely indifferent to her. Let me state right off the bat that I always thought Diane was a well-written character. I always thought Alison Brie's performance as her was great, and I always felt that she was just as important as the other characters in the show. My disconnect from Diane simply came from the fact that I didn't relate to her, which is kinda crazy if you know absolutely anything about me or this channel. Just like Diane, I have written books. Just like Diane, I have been a consultant for characters, narratives, and plot lines. Just like Diane, I make a living posting through social media. And yes, I do consider YouTube social media. You would think that maybe more than any other character, I would be firmly in Diane's camp. But that wasn't the case. I just never related to her, and something about her character and actions and struggles never earned my investment. Until season 6. To my surprise, and on some level my shock, by the end of the show's last season, I found myself legitimately connected to and invested in Diane. The show had somehow pulled a complete 180 with her, and best of all, I wasn't alone in this feeling. Shady Doorags, who at least for me is the granddaddy of Bojack Horseman content creators, expressed the same sentiment when he talked about Diane.
One of my wishes for season 6 was that Diane go through a journey that allows her to see her errors. I really wanted to like her again before the season ended, as she was originally my favorite character. And yeah, the show came through for me.
Shady and I combined have probably seen the show all the way through a dozen times, so for both of us to see this transformation in Diane during the last 16 episodes meant that some serious writing was going on beneath the hood. In keeping with the mission statement of this channel, I want to spend today's video talking about the writing that occurred to transform Diane, and on a larger level, talk about writing relatable characters as a whole. I know I need very little excuse to make Bojack Horseman content, and I know many of you have questions and concerns about writing and presenting characters to your audience, so I think this video can work for the both of us. Before we get into that though, super quick, and I know I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but please do check out Shady Doorags. I actually used a lot of his videos during my research for this video on Diane. He was making Bojack videos way before I ever started, and I took a lot of cues from him in creating my own, so make sure to give his channel some love. Link will be in the description. Anyway, now that my jaw is off the floor, stick with me for about 4 minutes to break down what you writers out there should know about relatable characters.
I'm clever and free-spirited and a little bit sardonic, but not so much that it's off-putting. I have vulnerabilities like everybody else, but just enough to make me relatable. That's the way to be.
It's not that easy.
You have surely heard the term thrown around a lot, but what specifically does it mean? Well, it's actually a bit different from the other literary terms and techniques that I have defined before, mainly because it's completely subjective. A relatable character, as redundant as this sounds, is simply any character that people can relate to. Some people find Samuel Tarly relatable, while other people find the Joker relatable. The designation is all based in the experience of the person who interacts with the fiction. However, instead of thinking in the binary terms of relatable character and non-relatable character, think of relatability as more of a spectrum. In the grand scheme of things, all characters are relatable. Some are just written using techniques that make them more relatable than others. But then that begs the question, why do writers want to use relatable characters? Well, that revolves around narrative investment. This is a term used to describe how much a person cares about a story. A writer can think about it as, how closely are the emotions and interests of my readers tied to the characters and narrative? One of the most famous and ridiculous examples of people being deeply connected to a fiction is James Cameron's Avatar. People were so invested in Pandora and the Na'vi that they literally got depression because they themselves could not travel to the setting of the movie. Now, while I don't think that most writers are shooting for that level of relatability, Writers do want the emotional moments of their narrative to impact their audience. When a character feels happy, they want you to feel happy. When a character feels sad, they want you to feel sad. A writer is always trying to impart the emotional beats of their narrative onto the audience, and the easiest way for that to happen is for the audience to be personally invested in the fiction. But now it's time for the million-dollar question. How do you write relatable characters? Well, relatability is based in how much a person understands a character through shared experiences. The more aspects that character shares with a person, the more likely that person will relate to the character. And of course, these shared aspects don't have to be one-to-one analogies either. I personally have never had to deal with an investigation going on in my school that sought to find out who had been making poop booby traps. However, that did not stop me from relating to DeMarcus Tillman in American Vandal Season 2. Many aspects of his character were shared with myself, and though they were represented and explored in different ways, the basis was still there for me to relate to. This is why ordinary people can connect to characters like Gundam Billionaire or Elemental Jesus.
Oh, you're using your made-up names.
No matter how over the top the character is, if the basis of a shared experience is established, a connection can be made. But that still doesn't really address how to create those shared experiences. Let's get into that then. There are 4 major ways to do this, and each one has a greater effect than the last. The first tactic is based in a character's appearance. Simply making a character look a certain way will draw in people who look similar to that character. This concept comes up most frequently around representation. Just from personal experience, I remember seeing Static Shock when I was younger and thinking it was so cool that a superhero looked like me. Virgil and I had almost nothing else in common, but since he looked like me, I related to him more. The second tactic is through character background. This could be their religion, culture, race, language, where they were raised, etc. It is easier for readers or the audience to relate to characters that share their background. As an American, I think it's super cool that All Might trained in America and has named many of his moves after US states. The next tactic is through the actions that the character takes. What hobbies, jobs, or activities do they choose to engage in? Going back to DeMarcus Tillman, much of his character was centered around basketball. Since I've been playing basketball since I was 4, seeing that part of DeMarcus's life really resonated with me. Relatable hobbies and jobs is one of the most important aspects in creating relatable characters, and is one of the reasons why a show like The Office has such a loving, invested fan base. But more important than any other tactic in constructing a highly relatable character is their assigned flaws and the conflict they engage in to overcome them.
Diane, I love that you still eat sandwiches. Flaws like that are what make you relatable to regular women.
The deficits that people see in themselves are deeply personal. When a person sees a character that shares in those flaws, it instantly creates a sense of unity. That flawed person can understand that equally flawed character in a way that others might not be able to. But most importantly, whatever journey that character is taking to overcome their flaw is directly related to how a person might view their own journey of self-improvement. When a flaw is shared between a character and a person, the fiction stops being just a story and can morph into a guide of how a person could deal with their shortcomings in real life. With this tactic, the story can become part of a person's reality, and in that case, it becomes part of their identity. This is why so many consumers of fiction are so against the idea of a Mary Sue. For those of you who do not know, a Mary Sue, or a Gary Stu for gender inclusivity, is a character in a fiction that is presented as so perfect and exceptional that they are practically devoid of flaws. The term originated back in 1973 when author Paula Smith wrote a parody Star Trek story following protagonist Mary Sue. The whole thing was a tongue-in-cheek satirization of the unrealistic characters present in Star Trek fanfiction, but the name Mary Sue stuck to be applied to all flawless characters. The avoidance of Mary Sue type characters is typically why fiction follows underdog characters that slowly become more competent and confident across the run of the fiction. Well-written characters will usually overcome their personal flaws to succeed on their journey, which can really hit home for a lot of readers and watchers. So, it is these 4 methods used in tandem with each other that generally create the spectrum of relatable characters. But then, are these the 4 methods that Season 6 uses to make Diane more relatable? Well, yes and no. As Diane was already a well-established character by the beginning of Season 6, variations of these techniques had to be used to fit around what already existed as her character traits and details. After rewatching every single scene involving Diane in the last season, there were 3 exceedingly subtle writing choices that moved Diane, at least for me, to that highly relatable side of the spectrum. The first thing that the show did was put Diane in a much more mundane, relatable position in life, all while maintaining the potential to be entertained by her story. Here's what I mean. Diane's life had been pretty extraordinary across the run of Bojack Horseman. She came into the show as a New York Times best-selling author who was immediately hired to ghostwrite the memoirs of a famous Hollywood actor. The memoirs, by the way, somehow won a Golden Globe. Diane was then revealed to be the girlfriend and eventual wife of an even bigger Hollywood actor. Following that, Diane was contacted by a billionaire celebrity to write his memoirs as he traveled around the globe performing acts of humanitarianism. And that's just through season 2. The rest of the show has her involved with riding in a car across a trans-Pacific highway in order to visit Hawaii, has her house literally fall underground during a party filled with famous actors, and has her directly contributing to getting all guns banned in California. Diane led a completely extraordinary life, one that most of us would never and could never experience. Again, that is not to say that Diane was not relatable in season 1 through 5. Only that Diane existed as a person whose experiences were not shared by the vast majority of people watching the show. The larger-than-life aspect of her life takes a complete 180 in the last season of the show, though. Therein, Diane lives a remarkably average, relatable life. She no longer is dating or interacting with Hollywood showstoppers. In fact, she is literally dating just a guy. Her job isn't consulting on multi-million-dollar films or traipsing around the globe with a billionaire. Her job is writing middle-grade fiction about a mall detective. Season 6 puts Diane in her most relatable position yet by creating circumstances around her that any person could see themselves in. Where the previous 5 seasons of the show had Diane stand as the voice of reason, constantly trying to arbitrate other characters to fix their moral deficits, Season 6 leaves Diane to only look inward. Her conflict during the season is devoid of any wacky hijinks. It's just depression. A real hard look at self-worth and self-esteem. Good Damage is one of my favorite episodes in the entire show, because as someone who has had depression, as someone who is training to become a clinical therapist to help others with depression, I thought Good Damage's visual representation of emotional turmoil was spot on. Season 6 made everything about Diane, from her surroundings to her conflict, much more down to earth and relatable. And that moves us into the second writing choice that Season 6 made. It gave context to Diane's actions, past and present. Across the previous 5 seasons of the show, Diane came off as an ungrateful, hypocritical perfectionist. To parrot what Shady Doorags once said, this doesn't make her a bad character, it made her a bad person. And in writing, the number one rule about making a bad person relatable is understanding the context as to why they are bad. This is what Infinity War did with Thanos, or what Three Houses did with Edelgard. But across seasons 1 through 5, there isn't a real context given for Diane's negative qualities. Sure, we are shown glimpses into Diane's past, and have seen characters make insightful observations about her in the present.
You know what your problem is? You hold everyone to an impossible standard, including yourself.
But both of those really only tease at the motivations for why Diane does what she does, and by leaving out a relatable context, we of the audience are largely left to accept Diane at face value, leading many people to feel off-put and disconnected from her. Again though, Season 6 changes that, and the 2 moments happen so quickly you might miss them, but the first is in the face of depression.
You just flip over the nothing, and underneath there's more nothing. Then you flip over that nothing, and there's more nothing underneath that. So you just keep flipping over nothings all your life, because you keep thinking under all that nothing, there's got to be something, but all you find is nothing.
And the second is in Good Damage.
That means that all the damage I got isn't good damage. It's just damage. I have gotten nothing out of it, and all those years I was miserable was for nothing.
These two pieces of information give relatable context to all of Diane's previous actions. She views life as a constant search for the good hiding underneath negativity. But of course, that demands that she constantly sees the world through a lens of negativity.
I'm not like you, okay? I don't fetishize my own sadness.
I just don't know why I should suffer because you have this ideological objection to feeling good.
But that search for good underneath negativity is really about herself, and it consumes all aspects of Diane's life, because she is terrified of the idea of having undergone negativity without it amounting to anything. Diane's high standards for everyone else, her moral pedestal sitting, her near addiction to doing takedown stories that uncovered the wrong that people have done, they are all rooted in her mindset that bad things must be associated with good things. Understanding these pieces of Diane helped put her actions across the previous 5 seasons into a more relatable framework. Diane wasn't so much an ungrateful hypocrite, as someone who didn't know how to be happy, and that is way easier to get behind. Still, there is one more thing that the show does to truly make Diane more relatable, and it's the most subtle and clever writing technique yet. Season 6 makes Diane a mirror of Bojack. Let me explain. Bojack has been the character that we have spent the most time with during the run of the show, and because of our intimate exposure to him, we as the audience have been given the most opportunities to relate to him. But if we think about relatability as shared experiences between a character and the audience, why do we relate to Bojack? The average viewer is not a famous actor. The average viewer is not super rich. The average viewer isn't 50 years old. And the average viewer definitely isn't a horse. But Bojack's relatability is not based in his appearance, background, or even his actions. We relate to Bojack because of his struggles.
People respond to the flawed portrait I painted of you. They see themselves in it.
Many of us definitely have issues with our parents. Many of us definitely have issues with alcohol and drug abuse. Many of us definitely have issues with self-destructive behavior. And many of us have had issues with striving to become a better person, no matter how hard life tries to keep you from it. Through these shared experiences of conflict and struggle, we watchers of the show have come to truly know Bojack, to see ourselves in him and understand him as a character. So then by making Diane as synonymous with Bojack as possible, our investment and understanding of him helps to build our own understanding of Diane. Now, I know, this might seem like I'm just spewing hot air, but if you look at the details of Season 6, you will notice a pretty consistent pattern of Diane going through the exact same experiences as Bojack did across the run of the show. In Season 1, Bojack wants to write and deeply struggles with a book of memoirs about his life. In Season 6, Diane wants to write and deeply struggles with a book of memoirs about her life. In Season 4, Bojack struggles with his own past and inadequacies illustrated by cartoon representations of those close to him. In Season 6, Diane struggles with her past and inadequacies illustrated by cartoon representations of those close to her. In Season 5, Bojack describes an emotional hole inside of himself based around spending his life in search of something positive that would validate him.
I kept waiting for that, the proof that even though my mother was a hard woman, deep down, she loved me and cared about me and wanted me to know that I made her life a little bit brighter. Even now, I find myself waiting.
In Season 6, Diane describes an emotional hole inside of herself based around spending her life in search of something positive that would validate her.
You just flip over the nothing, and underneath there's more nothing. Then you flip over that nothing, and there's more nothing underneath that. So you just keep flipping over nothings all your life because you keep thinking under all that nothing, there's got to be something, but all you find is nothing.
In Season 6, Bojack goes through an outward physical change to coincide with his inner change. In Season 6, Diane goes through an outward physical change to coincide with her inner change. Diane leaving from LA and her emotional journey of self-realization in Chicago is her own version of the rehab that Bojack also goes through. Diane had a terrible family life, just like Bojack. Diane creates a fiction that young people can escape to, just like Bojack. And to top it all off, Diane only makes significant changes in her life because of advice given by Bojack, advice that he had to utilize during his own journey.
I wasted so many years being miserable because I assumed that was the only way to be.
Season 6 sets up a situation where, because we are intimately acquainted with the struggle of Bojack, we instantly become intimately acquainted with this struggle in Diane. Season 6 makes Diane subtly parallel with Bojack, except her relatability is even more apt to flourish, because where Bojack is a rich, famous old Hollywood actor during his conflicts, Diane's conflicts happen when her life is much more mundane and similar to those of us watching, meaning her vulnerabilities are much more easily empathized with. If you want to be completely fair, the show has always played with this notion of Diane being the less exaggerated version of Bojack.
I always tell people you're like the not cool version of me.
But season 6 makes it a focal point of her character journey. So, by utilizing these 3 writing decisions that we discussed, putting Diane in a mundane, relatable position, giving context to her past actions, and making her a mirror of Bojack, the show pulled Diane to the strong side of the relatability spectrum, and managed to give her one of the most personal stories of the final season. Like many of you out there, I wasn't expecting it to happen, but I'm certainly glad it did. Anyway, just like that, you have wasted another perfectly good 20 or so minutes listening to me talk. Thank you all for watching to the end. If you like what you heard, subscribe to the channel or join in on Patreon to get some awesome perks. As always, it was a pleasure, and I will talk to you all again soon.